So one of the best innovations that I've seen, it's a paraprofessional role, but it very much contributes to addiction recovery, is the use of recovery coaches, specifically the CCAR model that came out of Connecticut. And it puts a real focus on the fulfillment of basic life needs as really key to helping people work their way out of addiction. To some extent, this is a common sense approach, but I think particularly for a lot of clinicians and medical doctors, it's part of our privilege that we don't necessarily think about homelessness and food insecurity and things that are very basic, very low on Maslow's hierarchy. So when we're working with people seeking freedom from addiction, we should always be looking at very pragmatically what are their most basic life needs and how are they getting met. Recovery coaching is wonderfully diverse in that it honors all pathways to recovery, but it is also wonderfully pragmatic in that it places an emphasis on helping people get community based resources so that they have a place to live, they have food to eat, and ideally are helping them to seek opportunities for advancement in education and job training and employment. All of these things are huge in helping a person transform their lives, but sometimes they're so simple and obvious that they get overlooked by well meaning professionals. So, one of the great benefits of my experience is that I'm routinely meeting with people who have lost everything. That creates an awareness for me and a level of gratitude for me that I am so appreciative of. There's a story that I often tell of a gentleman that I've worked with for some time now in addiction recovery. And he is absolutely brilliant in his ability to keep things simple. And he's absolutely a guru when it comes to appreciation. And the story I tell is I came out in a cold October afternoon. I was grabbing a cigarette in between clients, and he was standing in the driveway of my clinic, and he just had this huge grin on his face. And I looked at him and said, "How are you, my friend?" And I'll never forget it. He said, "I'm just so grateful." And my first thought was, what an extraordinary way to start a conversation. So I indulged him and I said, "What are you grateful for?" And he said, "I've got a place to live this winter and it's got heat." We continued that conversation, and it was a reminder to me very powerfully that in the midst of the day I was having, where I was stressed out about things that probably weren't at all important, and I was preoccupied with goals and ambition, I was talking to a man who knows very much what it's like to go without basic life necessities. And it was a very, very powerful reminder. And it's something that I've carried with me for a lot of years now because I don't think about things when they're not normal for me. So it's not normal for me to have food insecurity. It's not normal for me to be at risk for being homeless. There's a great many things that I can easily take for granted, and I don't want to do that. That's not who I aspire to being. Um, but what I notice about human nature is that no matter how good things are or how bad they are, if they stay consistent, they become our status quo. They become what's normal for us. And at that point, we'll just stop thinking about them and fail to appreciate them. So, gratitude and gratitude lists are actually something that I've seen have great benefit when people are struggling in addiction recovery. It helps us to move away from focusing on our problems and gain a greater appreciation and incrementally move towards solutions to our problems. So I want to have that gratitude. I also want to maintain the simplicity that my friend has, because human nature is to complicate and to intellectualize things that we find to be uncomfortable or changes that we're wary of making. The same gentleman that I just told the story about for years sat in an aftercare group that I've been providing, and he is amazing in his nonverbal communication. His facial expression, his body language just so clearly demonstrates to every person in that group, I hear you, I care about you. And one more story. So there was an individual in that same group who really was struggling greatly. And unfortunately, everything that they were struggling with was an area of powerlessness, which is, of course, a huge theme in not just addiction recovery, but trauma recovery. And I would maintain that it's actually one of the most important lessons that a person can encounter spiritually. I don't like powerlessness, but what I have learned over and over and over again is I hate what I do when I don't accept powerlessness. I put a lot of time and energy into things that I actually can do nothing about. I seek to have influence or even to manipulate in areas that I shouldn't necessarily be involved in at all, because I find the simple truth of a situation to be unacceptable. So, the person who shared in group that day was really very scared, very much in pain, but everything that they were ranting and spewing about were things that they were powerless over. And so when they finally couldn't find one more word to say, my friend looked at them and smiled and nodded and said, all that stuff that you got going on, is there anything you can do about it? And she reflected for a moment and she said, well, no, I can't do anything about any of it. And my friend said, well, then maybe you shouldn't worry about it. That type of simplicity is invaluable. When what we seek to heal is something that we've avoided perhaps most of our lives, when the road ahead of us is full of so much change and unknowns that it terrifies us, simplicity is a boon to everything. Simplicity allows me to see a clear course of action, but at the cost of knowing how I feel, which is usually what I'm trying to avoid in the first place. And I've worked with some of the best. I've worked with people that can take 2 plus 2 and turn it into trigonometry. But it's a form of avoidance. It's a way of trying to be in denial. It's a way of trying to not feel and remember and think as we authentically do. We're people who tend to judge our thoughts, feelings, and memories. And those are all internal behavior and should never be subject to judgment. So I hope that you'll embrace simplicity. I hope that you'll reflect on things to be grateful for. And maybe there's some changes there for you to make as well. Grab your journal and write down some thoughts. Email me, counseling@roadrunner.com, and let me know how you relate to this. Thanks.